On March 10, 2026, a 21-year-old woman was admitted to the hospital in a coma. Doctors were fighting for her life, and the people who brought her in didn't even register her with her real name. Instead, they claim it was all just a family dispute. But as doctors begin to assess the severity of her injuries, it becomes clear that the truth is much more horrific. For days, the young woman hovers between life and death. Her family has no idea where she is, and her phone keeps sending messages that give the impression that everything is fine. When the relatives finally discover where he is, they are confronted with a sight that no parent would want to see. What really happened during those few days? Who was sending the messages from her phone? And why, despite her serious injuries and questionable circumstances, does the person she was last with remain at large? This is a story of a relationship marked by fear, violence, and a multitude of questions that will lead to an investigation that reveals a series of disturbing omissions. And the truth of what happened turns out to be even more shocking than anyone imagined. On March 10th, Wendy Hernandez left her home to meet her ex-boyfriend, Pedro Jarrett. For months, she had been trying to end their relationship because of his abuse. She was even afraid to be alone with him. However, Pedro manages to convince her to meet to clarify their relationship. Wendy sets one condition: the meeting must not be at his house. He suggests that they have dinner with his family, and she agrees, albeit with great trepidation. As evening falls, her mother Gabriela, her sister Jessica, and the rest of her family begin to worry because Wendy doesn't come home. Later, they receive several text messages in which she assures them that she is fine and will stay for a while longer. But her mother senses something is wrong. According to her, the messages don't sound like what her daughter would write. When Gabriela tries to contact Wendy by phone, no one answers. The next day, she writes to her again, reminding her about her university studies. The answer is short. Wendy asks her mother not to worry, but this is completely uncharacteristic of her. She always lets her family know where she is. On Wednesday, the messages suddenly stopped. Anxiety grew into panic, and the family reported her missing. The next day, police officers arrive at the Hernandez home. They ask if Wendy lives there, and they demand her photo and birth certificate so she can be identified at the hospital. Gabriela is convinced that her daughter is no longer alive. But when she arrives at the hospital, she learns something unexpected. Wendy is alive, but in critical condition. According to doctors, she was admitted with cardiac arrest after losing a huge amount of blood and fell into a coma. Emergency resuscitation and several life-saving surgeries were required. The injuries are extremely severe. Internal organs are affected, as well as multiple fractures and serious damage to nerves and tendons. The family realizes that the messages they supposedly received from Wendy were most likely not sent by her. Since the young woman remains unable to speak, no one knows exactly what happened. Doctors recommend specialized testing, and the family makes the difficult decision to transfer her to the La Raza National Medical Center, despite the enormous risk. During the move, Wendy regains consciousness, but still cannot speak. After her condition stabilizes, her mother files a report with the prosecutor's office. There, she learns something surprising. A case has already been opened after an alleged domestic dispute, but the complaint was not filed by Wendy or her family, but by Pedro's mother. No one visits Wendy in the hospital to take her statement. When she finally manages to speak, she tells of a visit from Pedro's cousin to her hospital room. A medical examiner finds more than 50 stitches on her face and body and concludes that the case does not resemble a simple domestic dispute, but an alleged attempt at femicide. When Wendy's brother tries to file a complaint, he is told that the trial will begin in 15 days and that Wendy herself must give evidence in person. In early April, she is discharged from the hospital. She is still unable to walk normally, but nevertheless decides to seek justice. Before we understand what happened in those days, we need to go back in time. Wendy works as a nurse in a hospital in Ecatepec. She loves her job and believes that caring for people is her calling. At the time, she was the mother of a little girl who had been born just a few months earlier. At the time, Wendy was living with Pedro Jarrett, who also worked as a nurse. At first, he seemed attentive, but their relationship soon turned into one of constant control, jealousy, and psychological abuse. After Wendy is transferred to another clinic, Pedro's behavior becomes even more aggressive. The two move to Hidalgo, where he begins locking her in their home to keep her from going to work, monitoring her phone calls, and deceiving her family that everything is fine. When Wendy becomes pregnant, instead of being happy, Pedro starts blaming her and asking her whose child it is. Eventually, the two break up. Wendy returns to her mother and decides to raise the baby herself. After a while, Pedro begins to insist that they get back together. Under the pretext of having to get documents, he takes Wendy back to the house in Hidalgo. Once inside, he locks the door, pulls out a gun, and begins to threaten her. Wendy begs him to calm down and even asks him to let her eat one last meal for the baby's sake. He agrees, and the two go out to buy food. A little later, Pedro declares that they both must die. After Pedro agrees to go out for a meal, Wendy hopes she has managed to calm him down. But it turns out to be only a short break. A little later, he starts threatening her again. He tells her that they both have to die. If she doesn't die with him, he will end his own life and leave a letter blaming her for everything. After that moment, events unfolded far from everyone's eyes. Days later, Wendy was in the hospital in critical condition, and none of her relatives knew exactly what had happened during that time. After he manages to give testimony, a disturbing picture begins to emerge. Instead of immediate action, the investigation is faced with delays, omissions, and decisions that will later raise numerous questions. We are yet to find out what, according to the investigation, happened during those days, what evidence was collected, and why this case is causing so many public reactions and questions. Weeks after the attack, Wendy loses her second baby to the abuse she endured. Despite all this, she repeatedly tries to end her relationship with Pedro, but each time, he finds a way to bring her back through emotional blackmail. Pedro records videos in which he pretends to harm himself. He points a gun at himself and intentionally injures himself to make Wendy feel guilty. At other times, he threatens her that he has intimate recordings of her that were made without her consent. Over time, Pedro's control becomes complete. He begins to determine how Wendy dresses, how she speaks, and who she associates with. But in early 2026, she decides to change her life and begins studying law. Wendy's new beginning further angers Pedro. He believes she is starting a new life without him. His jealousy grows, and his accusations become more frequent. 3 days before the attack, the two meet at Pedro's parents' house. Instead of letting her leave, he begins sending messages to her family, pretending to be her, assuring them that everything is fine. It's March 10th, 2026. After spending the day together, Wendy makes her final decision. She tells Pedro that their relationship is over forever. She heads for the front door, but soon realizes that he's following her. When Wendy reaches for the front door, Pedro slams it shut. He looks her straight in the eye and tells her that she won't get out of there alive. At that moment, she realizes that his words are no longer just threats. Seconds later, the attack begins. Pedro uses his medical knowledge and delivers multiple blows. Wendy falls to the floor, feeling her strength slowly drain away. Suddenly, the door opens. It's Pedro's family. For a moment, Wendy believes that everything will be over, but instead of help, she only gets shouts from across the room. As she lies helpless, Wendy overhears a conversation she will never forget. Pedro tells his mother that he has now gotten rid of the problem. Shortly after, they begin to discuss what to do next. Finally, the family puts Wendy in a car and takes her to Las Americas Hospital. Pedro's brother tries to help her during the journey as she gradually loses consciousness. Wendy is admitted to the hospital as an unknown person. Pedro's family does not reveal her true identity and leaves the hospital. Later that day, Pedro posts a video in which he presents himself as a person suffering alone. After Wendy manages to testify, the prosecutor's office issues an arrest warrant for Pedro Herod. Instead of peace, however, new threats begin. Pedro's relatives warn Wendy that they will distribute her intimate videos if she does not withdraw the complaint. A few days later, the prosecutor's office tells Wendy that the search has not yet begun because they need his photos. When they finally begin the search, Pedro is already missing. As the search continues, Wendy begins her difficult recovery. Her daily life revolves around hospitals, checkups, medication, and lengthy rehabilitation. Meanwhile, investigators determine that after the attack, Pedro quit his job, stayed in a psychiatric facility, and then hid in a rehabilitation center, hoping to avoid arrest. On April 26, 2026, the search ended. Pedro Jarrett was arrested. Along with him, the authorities detained 4 of his relatives for alleged involvement in the case. After his arrest, Pedro was taken to the Specialized Service for Investigating Domestic and Gender-Based Violence, and after a medical examination, he was transferred to prison, where he remains during the investigation. At the same time, Wendy's mother publicly accused the institutions of having reacted too slowly. Wendy's mother has publicly accused prosecutors of acting too slowly, saying it was this delay that allowed Pedro to remain at large for more than a month after the attack. A protest was held in front of the prosecutor's office shortly afterwards. Families of victims and survivors demanded that the investigations not be neglected and that the perpetrators be brought to justice in a timely manner. Among the protesters is Carla Garcia, a woman who survived a similar attack. She accuses institutions of a lack of communication and insufficient protection for victims. As society demands justice, Wendy continues her recovery. She still can't stand for long, has difficulty using her arms, and undergoes constant medical treatments. After a long search, the police finally find Pedro. It turns out that since the attack, he has been hiding, changing locations, and even trying to change his appearance. On April 26, 2026, the search ended. Pedro was taken into custody along with several of his relatives who investigators believe helped after the attack. After the arrest, new interrogations begin. Meanwhile, Wendy continues to insist that the case be treated as attempted femicide, not as simple bodily harm. Meanwhile, another woman says she also reported Pedro for violence. If the authorities had responded in time, the attack on Wendy would probably never have happened. As the investigation continues, Wendy visits doctors daily and undergoes extensive therapy. Her recovery is slow and fraught with difficulties. Investigators find out where Pedro was hiding after the attack. The clues lead them to a psychiatric facility, and later to a rehabilitation center, where he hoped to remain unnoticed. The court later ordered Pedro to remain in custody until the end of the trial. The investigation continues, and the institutions also begin to take measures to protect Wendy and her family. Despite her ordeal, Wendy finds the strength to speak out publicly. She says she fears not only for herself, but also for her young daughter, and calls on institutions to better protect all victims of violence. On May 1st, the authorities announced the first permanent measures to protect Wendy and her family. Police surveillance was provided around their home, and an immediate team was to be dispatched in the event of any danger. The same day, the court ruled that Pedro Jarrett should be tried for attempted femicide. It was ordered that he remain in custody until the conclusion of the legal proceedings. Wendy is now starting to feel relatively safe, but the consequences remain. Every day she struggles to regain her health and the life she had before the attack. Wendy's story shows how difficult it is for many women to seek help in a timely manner. Fear, threats, and a lack of trust in institutions often keep them silent for too long. Today, Wendy is alive. Although the physical and emotional scars will remain for a long time, she finds the strength to tell her story to help prevent similar cases from being overlooked. Thank you for staying with me until the end of this story. If you think that such real cases should reach more people, support the video with a like, subscribe to the channel, and press the bell so you don't miss the next investigations. Share this video with friends and family because sometimes a true story can help someone recognize the danger in time. And now, write to me in the comments what your opinion is about this case. Thank you for your trust, and until the next story.